Team Fortress 2 is a multiplayer game that has amassed one of the largest communities online, and due to its ease of access and casual nature, has boasted one of the broadest audiences in gaming, with multiple sub-communities with their own distinct backgrounds. One of these sub-communities is the LGBT+ community. However, the LGBT+ community has existed long before video games were even a thing, and different from other groups, they do not come together mainly for affinity, but rather for support and civil rights. Having faced a history of discrimination, suppression, and denial, the gathering of genderqueer individuals has been in large part motivated to promote acceptance, visibility, and reassurance executed through activism. By challenging the status quo, they aim for a future where a genderqueer person no longer has to hide, hate, or deny their own existence, and can participate in society without fear of repercussions for being who they are. That is why many folks in the genderqueer community wear their gender or sexual orientation as a badge in any online forum they might reside in. By proudly outfitting themselves with their identity publicly, they can deliver a sense of solidarity to people who might identify similarly but cannot express themselves without risking their livelihoods. Unfortunately, the activism itself faces its own obstacles and objections. At best, people who dislike change oppose the activism and view it as a nuisance or delegitimate. At worst, others actively hate and pursue the disillusion of queer people for dogmatic reasons and see the activism as an attack to their principles. Regardless, activism is inherently disruptive, and as such can be seen as an annoyance at best or an invasive problem at worst. Thus, as genderqueer promotion has increased over the past decade, there has been a predictable amount of pushback towards the movement. To those in the community, this pushback can too be seen as frustrating or an attack to their own existence. With that being said, it's no surprise that Team Fortress 2 has attracted many from the LGBT+ community, as the game is not only fun, but also facilitates the gathering of any community using the tools Valve provided. Community servers allowed third-party server hosting, which led to the creation of servers that delivered an experience catered to a specific audience. In those servers, hosters could provide user-generated maps and mods to further specialize the experience, which also included moderation rules that kept the integrity of the server intact in order to keep their player base happy. And at least until Valve enabled SV Pure 1 on all official servers, Team Fortress 2 had an inconceivably large modding scene, as the game's casual nature let Valve not have to restrict the game's modularity. This let anyone personalize their TF2 client in any way they saw fit, and for many, to have their game reflect themselves in some way. All of this was a unique selling factor for Team Fortress 2 at the time, as these practices weren't widespread in the gaming community. This is what made TF2 approachable to those in the genderqueer community, as they could host their own community server, have it work in any way they saw fit, and allowed them to customize their game to their heart's content. Especially since gender identity discussion was nowhere as prevalent as it is now. This changed with the Meet Your Match update, as Valve steered Team Fortress 2 into becoming a more competitive game, which meant that they had to normalize the experience for everyone, which meant restricting the modularity of the game in order to level the playing field. Community servers were also starved of players with the removal of quick play, instead being replaced with a Valve-supplied matchmaker that was only populated by official servers. With this went the large modding scene that TF2 had, as these modifications were not allowed. As time went on and generations shifted in the general TF2 community, players forgot about TF2's modularity, making it a burning memory. While community servers are still available, Team Fortress 2 is a shadow of its former self in terms of customizability, and thus has fewer options for self-expression. However, there was an alternative route for user-generated content to still be included in the game, and official Valve servers. The workshop enabled the community to submit maps and cosmetics to be considered for inclusion in TF2 as an official part of the game. All that was needed was approval by Valve, which requires some respect to their guidelines on the workshop submissions. On July 18, 2024, a user-generated cosmetic named the Desk Engineer was accepted into the game. There was nothing extraordinary about the cosmetic except for an Easter egg hidden in the texture. If someone were to clip inside the engineer's body and look at the back of the name tag, they would find a trans pride flag or a bisexual pride flag. The creator of the cosmetic had hidden the pride flags in such a way to fly under the radar of Valve's approval process. This was no doubt a violation of Valve's guidelines for workshop submissions, but also an ethically questionable action, as Valve granted the privilege of user-generated cosmetics with the presumption that users would be honest and not abusive of the system. Regardless, this form of digital graffiti was applauded by the queer community, inside and outside of TF2, as it was seen as a positive form of activism to shine a light on the presence of the genderqueer community within the larger community. Plus, many who allied themselves with the community did not see it as a big deal, as the flags were not visible during regular play outside of edge cases, which in turn meant that TF2's art style and general aesthetic were preserved. Unsurprisingly, there was also a vocal pushback against the inclusion of the Easter egg. Usual actors that opposed the pride flags were expected, but an interesting reaction that was prevalent as well came from the hardcore fans of the game, who were not arguing against the message being pushed, rather focusing on the integrity of the game. Team Fortress 2, since its inception, had an unusually high standard for its art style, tone, and gameplay. Unlike other game studios that would chase trends and make their game's integrity malleable for the sake of appealing or selling to a wider audience, Valve kept the game's core assets consistent and uncompromising. While the game featured a high level of customizability for community-oriented and client-sided part of the game with sprays, decals, and other social tools, the base game itself kept a strict level of standards. As time went on and features were added, these restrictions were loosened in the official game to allow for greater possibilities, yet still hold some guidelines to keep the changes in check. For doing something that was rarely seen in games and in a way respecting the product that many had invested thousands of hours to, Team Fortress 2 has garnered its own respect and following that kept these principles of design as pillars that needed to be defended. Especially since, in their later years with the game, Valve had almost been negligent to the rules set by themselves, especially in regards to art style violations. By doing so, Valve was seen as going back on the respect of the player base, no longer sharing the love and attention that the remaining player base still had. By accepting items through the workshop system that before would have been rejected, Valve was treating TF2 in the same way that other AAA publishers were treating their own IPs, bastardizing the core game in order to chase profit. Needless to say, many in the community would begin advocating for the preservation of the game's core in an effort to preserve the remaining integrity TF2 has. Team Fortress 2 has a specific setting that Valve-made assets adhered to in its early lifetime, that being 1960s spy tech in the Badlands somewhere in the Midwest. References to other eras or pop culture that existed beyond that scope were reserved for promotional or extremely rare occasions. As time went on and Valve adopted community-contributed cosmetics, it arose an ire from many who loved TF2's original intention and felt that Valve was losing their way with the game. The critical sphere would continue to exist as Valve continued to strip away the most identifiable parts of Team Fortress 2 that made it unique and special. One important thing to keep in mind is that the preservation was always aimed at the core game. Team Fortress 2's malleability outside the core game was always embraced by the community during the golden and quick play eras of TF2. During the times when community servers were the predominant way to enjoy TF2, players were eager to include any kind of absurdity, fandom, or ideology that drastically changed the TF2 experience within the confines of the server. One significant community that called TF2 home because of the opportunities for self-expression was the Brony community. It could be argued that TF2 and Bronies had a symbiotic relationship due to each emboldening each other's fan bases with cross-exposure. This community is evidence that morphing TF2 into the likeness of an external community wasn't frowned upon just for its existence. Rather, distaste came from changes to the base game, such as with the inclusion of the magical mercenary cosmetic being one of the more talked about occasions. Yet, it wouldn't cause much controversy as the hat was restricted to Halloween. So it's no surprise that the act of digital graffiti that was not only out of place, but also done to intentionally fly under the radar was seen as something disrespectful to the TF2 community, even with its good intentions. Debates over the situation were rampant, with each side defending their positions vehemently, and things did go off the rails frequently in those heated arguments. Prejudice assumed the worst about their perceived enemy, and pride blinded them from seeing the bigger picture in regards to the true reason why the problem exists in the first place. Ultimately, all this led to was a big online waste of time, as no real conclusion was ever met and everybody stood by their laurels, just ending up with two parts of the community further dividing themselves. By August, Valve would quietly remove the flags from the texture. It is in my opinion that the reason why Valve removed the flags was not due to disagreements with the genderqueer community or adherence to the art style. Rather, it was just because the inclusion was a violation of their terms of service and also did not want to invest the effort to deal with any further controversy. Ironically, Valve had set up the controversy on their own. By centralizing the game with matchmaking and streamlining the experience, it forced a single way to enjoy TF2. By also trying to appeal to specific parts of the community through the main branch, it alienated those that were not attended to, and incited conflict with the perception of what TF2 was. When community servers reigned supreme, there was no need to cater to any kind of demographic, as every group could customize TF2 to their liking within the confines of their own space. TF2 could stay in a superposition of being both a rigidly stylized game and a viscous sandbox. One where players could choose to play a game devoid of anything outside of its scope of the 1960s war-themed hat simulator, or a platform for a community and a fun safe space for the LGBT+ community to express themselves freely and call home.